All right. Good afternoon. I am Catie Brown. I am a graduate student in the Department of Psychology, and I work with Dr. Maytal Netta in the Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience Lab, where, broadly speaking, we study emotion. And today I'll be talking about emotion some in the context of the most terrifying of terror, experimental error. That's the last of the rhyming I'm going to try to do, but not the last of the Batman voice. So, going back to the emotion part. So, we study how people respond emotionally to emotional events. Their response might take the form of a facial expression, saying how you feel, looking at what your brain is doing, or what the rest of your body is doing. And what you might be responding to is anything from an event like your high school graduation, probably bittersweet, seeing a sad movie, or even looking at pictures. And that last bit is what we do in the lab. We have people look at pictures that are so powerful and so emotionally evocative that in most cases they'll elicit the same response universally. So I'll show you an example through a little experiment. So I need everyone, when I show you this next picture, to say the first thing that comes to your mind. And I need you to do it. Okay. 1, 2. Aww. Yes, look at him. We all just experienced a very positive emotional event together. So I saw a lot of smiles. So yeah, that's the facial expression reaction part of it. But what was also happening is a greater activation of the sympathetic branch of our autonomic nervous systems. Yeah. So our bodies were kind of gearing up to respond to this stimulus, this thing that appeared in our environment. And that is something that we can measure in the lab. And the way we measure it is through something called electrodermal activity. So you see here that we play, with electrodermal activity, we put electrodes on people's palms, and we run a small current through the dermis. And the more your sympathetic nervous system is increasing, the more sweat you're going to produce, the more conductive it is for that current, the greater signal that we see. And that's how we record it. So what the data look like are this. So you can see here, we were going along, listening to me ramble, and then puppy happened. And it was awesome. And now we're kind of recovering from that. I don't know if we'll ever recover. So that is how the body can respond to emotion. So I mentioned the body responds to emotion, and I mentioned how we were all smiling, but you can measure other facial expressions, like for instance, a frown. I blew that up really big. But you can measure a frown by measuring the facial muscle activity. So we put electrodes on what's called the corrugator muscle, and so what I like to call the how now brow frown muscle. And the more that people frown, even if they're not visibly frowning, in response to a negative stimulus like this, ew, sorry, right after lunch, then we're going to see this increased activity. So close to 0 means we're going fine. Moldy grapes, fine. Moldy grapes, fine. You get the point. So in the lab, we can measure facial activity through, this is called electromyography. We also measure electrodermal activity, and we ask people whether they think a picture is positive or negative by pressing buttons. So there's a lot going on, and we get a lot of information from it, which is awesome, but it also leaves a lot of room for our good friend, experimental error. Okay, I'm done with that. So this is where the chairs come in. One day, I was running a participant. It was the second of 2 sessions. The first session was about an hour long. We got great data from that. They came back a week later. This session was about 90 minutes long. We were nearing the end. Everything was going good. And I remember I was getting a little restless. I swiveled in my chair, and then the computer screens went blank. They just shut off. But the lights were still on, so I knew the power wasn't out. And I was scrambling to turn everything back on, and I realized none of the data saved. Thank you, yes. So this 2.5 hours of data we just can't include in the study. And it might not seem like such a big deal, and it might not seem like such a huge mistake, but it was one of several little things that kept happening that keep setting this study back. Things like not setting up the electrodes right, forgetting to plug the electrodes in, overlooking errors in my code on the computer. And those little things really start to ball up and they become big things. And that's hard to kind of own up to, because I know one day this study is going to get published and I'm going to read that line that says X number of participants removed due to experimenter error. And I'm the experimenter and those are my errors. Like, that's not so fun to talk about, because of course I want good data, and because of course I want a good image of myself out there. But it means that I was putting myself out there. It means that I was researching, I was making the science happen, I was getting the data. And yeah, I learned the hard way, for sure. But I learned something. I took something away from that, and now I can improve upon future studies that I do. So I guess the takeaway that I want you all to get from this are 3 things. 1, emotion research is cool. Think approve that. 2, to not be afraid to learn from your mistakes. To not be afraid to get out there and be proud of the work that you're doing and be proud of the fact that you're trying and you're the one making it happen. Because if you do that, you're going to make the mistakes. And then 3, to not blame your mistakes on office furniture. That may not be the most mature thing to do, but rather own it and be confident in saying, yes, I am the experimenter and those are my errors. Thank you.